Hello and welcome to a brief introduction on autograph. First thing that I would like to tell you, and I can't show you because I've already sort of changed that setting, is when you open autograph it will ask you if you want the basic or the advanced version. You should go for the advanced version because that's where all the good stuff is. So when you open a new page it will be sorted into this type of layout. The axes will be set from -66 and from -44 by default, but you can obviously change that. There are several icons to be clicked on, so the menu here, that's your main tool for pointing to stuff. That tool is for doing points. That tool is for drawing and doodling, which with mouse is very inaccurate. Luckily there's a delete button. This hand moves your axes around if you want to move them around manually. There's a magnifying glass for zoom in, zoom out. Now what these two, and basically all of these here will be zooming tools. This particular one keeps the ratio of your X to Y scale depending on where you click. This one, so these two will only affect, as you can see, the X-axis. These ones will only affect the Y-axis. And these ones are for creating a box around where you want to zoom in. Or zoom out. And again, you can change these all by changing your axes in the changing axis stuff. Let's go and look at the menus here. That opens a new statistics page. Don't need that. That's a new 2D graph page. That's a 2D graph page. That's a 3D graph page. Again, we don't really need that. Open, save, undo. I will usually use the keyboard controls if I want to do them, so Control O, Control Save, Control Z. That asks you where you want this particular part of the screen to be, if you want it below or do you want it on the side. And the idea is that all the functions that you type in will be listed here. So you can set how many functions are visible, and if you have about 300 you probably want it here. If you have 2, the bottom of the screen should be fine. And then we have a toggle between an angle in degrees or an angle in radians. Toggle whether the results box is visible or not. Now the results box, if you make it visible, there are two different ways of making it visible. It's visible like this and it stays there, but if you click on this one it auto hides it, but it's still there. And then we have a view history of what we've done. Nothing so far. Then we come to the main button that I want to talk about, which is Edit Axes. Here you can set where you want your X and Y to start and end, so -10 to 10, -20 to 20. You can press tab to change in between them. This, if I now press OK, you can see that my axes have changed. This is how often the numbers should be put on the axes and how often should these ticks be on the axes. You can let them be automatic, decided by autograph, or you can set them yourself. So say I want numbers every 1 and I want ticks every 0.5. Same here, I want numbers every 1, and in increments of 1, and ticks every 1 again. If I press OK, you can see that it's changed to look like that. You may like it or you may not. If you click on intelligent ranges, it starts off with -66. I don't really know what this does, to be honest. I mainly use the equal aspect button, which will change the x coordinates so that you will have equal aspect axes. Notice that here you also have 3 more tabs, 4 in total. And the question is, what is your variable on the horizontal axis? What is your variable on the vertical axis? You could theoretically use, I don't know, t and v for a velocity time graph and label them accordingly, such as time and velocity. What this does, let me show you, which jumps to this button, which is enter equation. If I now type in y equals x, it still does it. Does it do it with v equals t? It does it as well with v equals t because my axes are labeled v and t. However, x and y will always work. If I change these back to x and y, notice that this has been changed to be a straight line through 1 because, guess what? I don't know who v and t are. Right. I can also back to default them. You have other options such as not showing the axes, hiding the vertical axis, showing all of them, and showing arrows or not showing arrows. I quite like showing arrows. You could show the grid or not show the grid, or you could have a polar coordinates grid, or you could have subdivisions up till 10. And those are going to be a bit more faded and look more like grid paper. You could have a key, that's the key there at the bottom, below, or to the right, which is the button there, or you could have none. And this defaults to how many entries will be visible. If you increase that to say 7, you can see that this box has now increased. I personally don't really want it that big. And the third one, which is probably one that you want to play with a bit, is the appearance. So edit the font, I don't know, depending on what you want. Edit. Inside editing the font, you can also edit the size. Axis labels, if you want them, you could have them again big. The color of the axes, the thickness of the axes, the color of the grid and the thickness of the grid, color of the background, the key if you want it written differently, and if you press OK, you can see that stuff has changed. Well, in this particular case, for the worse. So, new page, because I don't really want to undo all of that. Back to where we were. That's that button. Next button is the text box. But before we get into the text box, let's actually enter something, which is enter equation. You can see that there's a shortcut of enter, so I will use the shortcut. You enter an equation, which is really a graph. So y equals x cubed plus x squared minus x minus 5. Oh, look, there's a line. Not very helpful. Let's see what happens if we play with these. Autoscale has changed my y coordinates to make my function apparently nicely visible. You may like it or you may not. not too keen on this particular curve because it doesn't cross the x-axis 3 times. So let's try to change that. Let's change that to a minus. Nope. Let's subtract, let's add x instead. Oops, I've deleted the power, so now it looks all weird. No. A bit of trial and error, so I'll come back to once I have an equation that actually does this as it should. Welcome back. I now have a function or a graph that crosses the x-axis 3 times, which is what I was looking for, and I've set my axes to be from -2 to 6 and from -30 to 20. This gives me a very nice picture of the curve, and I can see both turning points. It's not being cut off, it doesn't look all weird. One thing that we need to do is make sure all our graphs are labeled. In order to do that, hover with your mouse over the function until it looks like a little black arrow. Select it, go to the equation, to the text box, sorry, and you can see here that this will be set up automatically. Now there are 2 parts to a text box: the text that you can edit and the text that you can't edit, because that is dynamic text. If I change my equation, that will automatically change. Personally, I don't like it being called an equation because it's really not an equation, it's a graph. And I will center it. And let's talk about how the text box looks. Now, this has been already set to my preference because I tend to switch things to my preference. And if we type in a text box with some normal text, you have this formatting here, which is not really the standard one. Anyway, how can you change this? Well, you can edit the font from here to, again, whatever you wanted, bold, not bold, regular size. Edit the frame, thickness, what margin should the text be left around, what color should the border be, do you want a gradient in your border, do you want a solid color, do you want it to be slightly transparent or not. If you set it to be slightly transparent, if you move it over your equation, you can still see the equation underneath. I personally prefer to have no transparency, and I usually will set this as the default because that's how I like it. Also notice that there's this little inverted square there. You can drag it and that acts as an arrow. So now, there you go, your graph is labeled and it's clear which one you're pointing to. So that's the first introduction to autograph, how to insert equations, how to change the axes, and what these buttons do. We'll talk a bit more about how to do specific things for decimal search, Newton-Raphson, and x equals g of x in future tutorials. Thank you very much for listening.